Hello, and here we are on the Ascension forecast on Monday. So welcome everyone. I'm just letting the people in that's joining me on Zoom for the spiritual think tank that we do afterwards. And for the rest of you, just grab yourself a cup of tea and think of this time as kind of receiving energies related to the Ascension energy. You know, it's not just about what I say, it's about the energy I transmit with it. So sit down and just receive the energy. You can participate and ask questions, or you could just let the energy wash over you and see what it raises for you, like what insights does it bring up for you. So this week is, I think it's quite, well, I suppose the universe always knows the divine plan. And as far as these talks have been going, it knows what it's doing. So this week it actually says the topic is weddings. So if you remember last week, we spoke about the marriage vows to yourself. Well, I didn't know it was going to go down the wedding track, but I think that's what we're going to be talking about a bit more today. And again, words are important. The frequency that we're talking about right now of weddings is slightly different than that of sacred unions, even though they are interrelated. So we're going to be examining what weddings mean as a separate kind of issue to the sacred unions. So grab yourself a cup of tea. Hello, everyone on Zoom, and hello to those on YouTube. And hopefully we'll get started in a few minutes, but hopefully you guys will enjoy the energy of what weddings bring for us today. So the way I see it is that every time we get together on a Monday, we're starting to work frequencies into our lives, because everything we do today is creating our tomorrow. And if we want to have a different future, then we need to sort of break out of our glass boxes and start thinking about things differently. And for me, with the divine intelligence that's been coming in, there's been a lot of things to make us think differently about at the moment. Lots of things challenging beliefs that we used to have and encouraging us to think bigger. And part of today's conversation will also be about timelines and time, because that's been coming up a lot the last few days as well. So let's start with thinking about weddings. And I should point out, this is not going to be a conversation about soulmates or twin flames. I know that that is classed as a sacred union, but remember, my work is all to do with soul vision and soul alignment. So that's not going to be relationship related for me. So the way I feel that this wedding energy is coming through is more to do with the sacred unions that we create in our life within ourselves. So think of it as male and female energies integrating. Think of it as soul and personality, mind and body. Trying to think of any, or your connection to your life path. Anything like this is what we're talking about when we're talking about sacred unions. So hopefully you're all ready and comfortable. Everybody's logged on here to my Zoom session, so we're all ready to go. So welcome, and we're going to be discussing the ascension frequencies for this week. So the way I see it is that each week we're being given new insights for us to be able to connect more authentically to who we are and create the future that we deserve. So when the word wedding came up, to me that had a slightly more 3D feeling to it than sacred union, because I'm sure there must be cards in my deck that actually call it hierogamous or sacred union, but it's not that came up, it was the wedding one that came up. So what does a wedding mean to you guys? So for me, it's quite legal, it's contractual, it's binding to a certain degree, but it's also a value exchange. You know, weddings, the origins of weddings come from this value exchange, which, given that we've been working on our creative value and obeying our soul, it kind of does fit in. So I want you to start this session by thinking about imagining a person that you would marry. Now, this isn't necessarily like a boyfriend or anything, but just imagine a person that you might decide to marry, because many of us these days don't want that contractual obligation. Some of us love it, some of us don't. It's a very mixed bag. But if you were to think about marriage, do you find that dating somebody versus marrying them changes the expectations or the boundaries of what you will and will not put up with when you make that decision? And as we step into that feeling of what does it take for somebody to be good enough for us to want to marry them and stay with them in a long relationship, then let's start to take that energy and think of that as in, are we giving that to ourselves? So I've got one comment coming in saying that it's a promise of being authentic to each other and always. So that's a nice vow to then take and say that promise to yourself as well. Because the interesting thing as humans is we're often really quick to give other people more of our energy, more of our time, and more of our promises than we are to ourselves. So this exercise of just practicing imagining somebody else and what you'd expect from them is really you writing your vows to yourself. So is there a vow that you would write for somebody else that you wouldn't necessarily write for yourself? That's the question we want to start with. So when I started looking into this topic, and I actually started looking into hieroschemas and sacred unions last year, I ended up with a story about a weaver and a cowherder, which I'd never heard of before. It was quite an interesting kind of soul vision kind of thing that popped up. So I kind of started looking for it, and its actually origins is in China, and it's kind of their Valentine's Day. And I thought I'd just share that story while you're thinking about marriage and what it means to you, because in the story, the weaver was weaving and she was so dedicated to her work that her father decided that she needed something else in her life. So he arranged a marriage to a cowherder, hoping that would bring balance to her life, that she would be as dedicated and as accomplished in both the marriage and her weaving. But she actually gave up the weaving and became all focused on the marriage and the love and the joy that the two of them had. And the king or the father wasn't very happy, so he split them up. And he decided they could only meet together once a year so that she wouldn't get distracted from her weaving. So I'm not quite sure why they changed their minds halfway through that story. But the bit that I really liked was how they come together. And that's where my story started with it, was that she and he would only come together on the seventh day of the seventh month on the lunar calendar, which this year would be around the 22nd of August. And the way they would come together would be that they would be separated by the Milky Way, because these are celestial beings. So the father separated them to stop them kind of constantly trying to get together by putting the Milky Way between them as a celestial river. And the way that she would cross was that magpies would come and they would join their wings to create a bridge for her to cross over and for her to meet with her lover. And that whole imagery, if you take that into the divine masculine and the divine feminine and bringing those together, just really made me, it wasn't a romance as such, it was just the celestial energy that it was bringing together over the magpie bridge that really caught my attention. So when we talk about male and female, the female aspects are to do with the nurturing, intuition, empathic qualities. And the male energy is to do with structure, protection, action, strength. So you can see why bringing these together would be a sacred union, and mixing it up with a bit of the Milky Way, I think, just adds that extra sparkle to the whole experience. So if we think of our sacred unions as weddings, then our sacred male and our sacred female, what contract would you put in to make sure that those two were operating in a balanced way in your life? What would you write into the contract? What would be your non-negotiables? What would be the values you'd expect to share? What would be the thing that you're working towards together? How would you be authentic with both those energies? And start thinking of it as a contractual agreement, because when we put contracts on things, for some reason, we take them more seriously and we start paying more attention. And I think that's what the wedding energy is trying to bring in, is that the time has come now. If you really want the life that you deserve, you need to now think of this in quite serious terms and write your own contract on what you will and won't put up with and what you do and don't want. So another aspect of this sacred union is between your personality and your soul. How do you balance those two? What are you willing to allow the personality to get away with and compromise on versus what your soul wants? How do you listen to your soul so your soul has a fair hearing in the combination of this marriage? So you can kind of see why this wedding energy kind of starts shaping at this point. Now, we're probably already all aware of weddings in terms of our soul and our personality and our male and our female, but there's a couple of other categories that have been coming up. So we've got respect, honesty, and affection coming in here, explaining how those are things that we want from our marriage and our wedding. And can we give those things to ourselves? That's what we want to try and find out, is how do we create structure in our life so that we give that stuff to ourselves on a daily basis. And that's one of the reasons I don't focus too much on soulmates and twin flames, because the vibration we hold is what defines our life. So if we can't hold ourselves accountable to the energies that we want to see in somebody else, then we're never going to be the right vibration to attract it in somebody else. If we're lying to ourselves about who we are, what we will do and won't do, if we're compromising ourselves and our authenticity to fit in, then we're more likely to attract somebody else who also does that. Now, if we take that then into our businesses and our work, you can see the same dynamics happen there. And part of what this message was about, because I do soul vision, then is our vision for our work, what we're here to achieve, what we're here to deliver onto the planet. So that becomes our, either through employed work or through our own self-employed businesses, or our creative energy, the outlet for our creative energy. But that energy has to be paid and valued, just like a marriage contract. So we all have business contracts when we set up our businesses. We have employee contracts when we get employed. But again, now this wedding is asking us to start thinking about what would we write in our own contracts to ourselves. Now, if we think about our current timeline as a book, and if we think about different incarnations that are kind of related, are chapters of that book. So we're in maybe chapter 5 of our timeline in existence right now. And up until now, the rules of engagement have been different. The old paradigms have been falling away. So the way we move forward in the future is not going to be based on how we completed the previous chapters. So we have to start looking at having a blank page in front of us and writing the story that we're about to step into, which again, the contracts, like integrity last week, are the things that hold us accountable to ourselves and help us keep on track. You know, the integrity was the values and things, but this is now writing it into a contract to motivate yourself to keep honest to that process that you want. And we're at that point now of writing this new chapter. So the contracts are important. What we write in these contracts now is going to define how the next chapter is going to unfold. And it feels very much at the moment that it told me to look at time like snakes and ladders. There's time slips and time jumps, and we're all over the place at the moment. But it feels like instead of thinking that you have to take 10 steps to get 10 steps ahead, if you can change your vibration and get your contracts and your integrity spot on, basically becoming aligned with what you want, you can then jump onto the next step and go shooting up a ladder and jump 20 paces forward in your life. Now, it's not necessarily 20 paces forward on the timeline you were on, the trajectory you were on, because you might have mastered some energy frequency that you just hadn't managed to let go of the past hurt before, that almost catapults you onto a completely new timeline. A timeline where all the past things that were holding you back, or all the past hurts that were impacting you, are no longer there, almost just like they've been null and void. So you can see now, without the structure of the old paradigms, we no longer have contracts. We no longer have rules of how we're behaving. It's for us to create our new ones. And without the contracts, I think I said this last time, like without integrity, without knowing who you are, you're going to feel a bit lost at sea. You're not going to know which direction and point your boat in, because the structures that used to define your mission, that used to define what you were here for, have all collapsed, giving you freedom, which liberation's great, but equally liberation comes with now you're responsible for your own life. You're responsible for helping yourself along your own path. And that's where we're now having to have these extra things put in place that we put in, that we're flexible with, that we know will help us step onto the correct path and lead us to where we want to go. So it's kind of stepping out of that hoping and wishing and wanting, and actually starting to sit down and become the alchemist creating. And those contracts and this wedding topic, I think, is relating to this. So if you've kind of thought a little bit more now about marrying somebody and what you would or wouldn't put in place, have you had any insights that will now help you think about doing that for yourself? Now, there's lots of things you can put into a contract. If you're somebody that's always late, then come up with a process that helps you deal with that. It's not about hiding our shadow side. It's about loving every aspect of ourselves. Contracts are not penalizing. They can just be techniques and processes and ways of dealing with our weaker side until we learn other ways to master them. So contracts don't have to be just like, if you don't do this, you get penalized. They can be, I will promise that when I'm late, I will do this. I won't beat myself up. I will accept that sometimes my life gets a bit crazy, or maybe I'm timeline jumping in between, because I get that a lot where I suddenly feel like time has disappeared and I've been gone for 4 hours and I'm not quite sure where. But that kind of timeline jumping and coming back is happening a lot for us. So it's being kind to ourselves, supporting ourselves, unconditional love for ourselves, but not just the words. You know, when we're writing a contract, you know, the legalities of every word matters. Write it out in full detail and really give it a lot of flavor, emotional flavor, so that you can connect to it every time you read it and remind yourself that this is your life. This is who you are meant to be. You are meant to be authentic, playing big, being impactful, making a difference in the world. And the contract is the means to help you remember that when the usual chaos of life come up and you're not quite sure which direction to take. You can always go back to the contract, remind yourself, and then get back on track again. So somebody in the Zoom group has just said that timeline jumping is affecting them as well. So yeah, time slips and time jumps have been going on for a while, but they are intensifying. In fact, it feels like time is speeding up right now with Ascension. It feels like days are just blurring into one. And I think this is part of this, like I said, snakes and ladders things, where you might feel like you're not making progress in terms of a week's gone by and you don't think you've finished the work you were supposed to do. And then suddenly in one moment, it's all finished. It's a very unusual kind of construct. And part of our May energy reading in the membership I did this month was this Father Time and learning to understand time in a different way. So again, I think that's why the contracts are important, is to really feel structure around if time's disappearing. You know, if we can't rely on progress day by day, then we need a different construct. Then contracts will help us. Our own personal contracts will help us find ways to deal with that. So how does that sound so far? Speeding up, and yes, not finishing things in a week. Yeah. So there's another part of the time as well, is that things might come in the wrong order. So if you think you have to do step A, B, and C in that order, you might find C gets done first before A, even though it might make absolutely no logical sense at all. And again, that's part of this time shifting, causing this bit of chaos, and which is why we need that contracts to help us see. So like, could you imagine, I don't know, maybe writing a book and starting with a conclusion before going to the beginning? Not that people don't do that, but some people would find that really hard if their perfectionism archetype was strong. That might be really kind of counterintuitive. But the logic of what we think is logical, because if we're using time as the measure, is going to really mess that up. So let's just focus back now on the message. So the message is weddings and sacred unions. So just tune into your body right now. Which sacred union do you feel is the weakest for you at the moment that would benefit from having a contract created? So do you think your divine masculine and feminine are balanced and are working together harmoniously? Do you think your personality and soul are working together harmoniously? I've got a couple of yeses coming in off the Zoom. So if you can body test, this is a good time to start your body testing to see what you're getting as answers here. How about your commitment to your life path? Think of this as a sacred union to your life path. So rather than thinking life is happening to you, starting to consider that you are here to manifest and create your life. And then think of that contract. Are you in that sacred union with you creating your life? So now we're starting to give 50-50s. Yeah, I thought this one would start bringing it up a little. So commitment to life path needs looking into, and 50-50. Yeah. So this is where this comes, like I said, this is why timelines are important. So I got one other one. Let me just read it here. Are you doing enough with your power? Now, power being your unique frequency. And again, this is a sacred union to your abilities and to your skill set beyond perhaps your training or college education, the thing that you're here to deliver. So yeah, again, some mixed messages there as well. So we can see how this wedding is starting now to be able to offer us a opportunity to review the contracts that we've made to those things, to our life path, to our power and our unique frequency, and then start to write a new contract on how that's going to be, how we're going to honor it, how we're going to respect it, what value exchange we're going to expect in exchange for delivering these into the world. The final one to think about is, so I'm just reading the, so one's at power, yes, frequency, no, and the other's got the opposite. So the other thing to think about is your business. So think, even if you're employed and you're working for somebody else, your first client is your first job. That's the first time you exchange your energy and your thinking for money. So whether you're employed or working for yourself, just think of it as the same energy. And I want to know if you are committed to that business. Now, allowing for the fact you might feel like working for somebody else might be a waste of time, maybe, so you're not going to be that committed, but that's an important revelation in itself, because our work should be an extension of us, and it should be part of our journey, not something we go away and do and then come back to our lives. If it's integrated and balanced, then it's a much more pleasurable journey that we take. So is your work and your business, do you feel that that is in alignment with who you want to be authentically, that sacred union between those two things? And it might help for us to imagine our business at this point as a partner. So like we did a bit with the timelines and the male and the female, imagine there's you and you're marrying your business. So imagine how that's going to work out. What contract are you going to make between you and your business to say that you're going to fight for it, defend it, grow it? Because everything we're doing in our work time is what, 50% of our time, probably in our whole lifetime, if we ignore school and getting older. It's quite a large chunk of time. And what we want to be able to do is to make sure that we're in alignment in that area as well. Because again, if our work is tied into our power and tied into our soul vision, then it should be easy to marry that business and that work that we do. But if it's not, then it's always going to feel like a bickering couple. It's like the business says, I want you to spend more time on me, and you're going to go, oh, but I want to go out, and they're going to argue backwards and forwards, just like a married couple. So get the feeling of that kind of business side. So I got working for myself, yes. Working for someone else, no. Always putting in the effort, love and respect, nurture, passion, and making a difference, yeah. So again, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take these untangible concepts like male and female, soul and personality, and turn them into beings of you plus your partner that you're about to get married to. And then look at how you work with those energies in order to help you have a better understanding of how you give up on yourself, how you sabotage yourself by not nurturing and feeding the thing that you're marrying or the thing that you've created the sacred union with. And then how can you create contracts to help you until you can develop the healthy habits? How can you create contracts right now to yourself and vows and promises to yourself to help you have a structure in order to move it into the new timeline that you deserve? So what do you now think about weddings and contracts now? How does that come up for you now? Because I think if we're all here to become these new quantum humans, then learning time-bending skills, learning how to manage ourselves, how to be responsible for ourselves, learning how to be accountable, then all of these skills and integrity, valuing our creative process, obeying our soul, all of these things we've been talking about over the last few weeks are part of our new tool set for us to learn and to have available so that we can carve out this new timeline that we want. Again, feels more about respect. And I don't know what it is when it comes to our own projects that we can often be setting up our own business and still not value it or treat it as an entity in its own right and nourish it in the same way. It becomes, the classic is many of us are sensitives and yet we can't sell ourselves and we can't stand up for our business and sell it. But if that was our child, then we would fight. So when we turn it into a child of ours, we will fight for it. We will defend it. We will want it to grow. We will do whatever it needs to grow. But when it becomes a business, we all feel apologetic to ourselves, like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be pushing that so hard. But if you really do believe in your power, your unique frequency and what you're here to achieve, then that fighting is no different than fighting for somebody else. And we will very easily do it for somebody else way more than we'll do it for ourselves. So this month is very much one of defining your new timeline, the biggest, boldest timeline you can find. So do look at what integrity to yourself you need and what contractual things you can write about. Maybe sit down and list all the things you do and give it a value, Sat down and held space for a family member who was upset, £100. Sat down and put the children to bed, £50, just start valuing your input to what you're doing. Because if you start adding up the time that you spend doing all these things, then you'll start noticing what you do and how you do it. Because some of this stuff can be so unconscious, but you can forget about it. And then when you write your contracts, you can then decide what is really important, where do I need to spend more time, and what is not so important, and what can I take away. And these are the steps that then start you building the timeline and the changes that you want to see in your life. If time with your children is more important, then you have to give up some time somewhere else to find it. That might be one of your contractual statements that you make. So we're coming up to the end of time. So hopefully that's given you something to think about and to stretch you a bit into this wedding concept and how the wedding impacts our different parts of us marrying, plus our business, plus our timeline, plus our power, our unique frequency. And to start thinking about these as beings that we are marrying and deciding if, is that business worth getting married to? Is it of a good enough, is it in a good enough health for us to even want to get involved in? And that includes employers and jobs and all sorts. So I'd love to go more about all of this because it's quite a big subject, as all of these seem to be, but hopefully that's given you enough ideas to get you started. So this week I'm doing a workshop on Thursday. That would be the 24th or 25th of May. And I'm only inviting certain people to join us, but if this resonates with you, then DM me and we can talk about it. But we're working on a workshop where we're looking to create our new timeline. And the plan is that as well as creating the new timeline, which, that's going to take a longer time to do, but we're going to get it started, at least the structure of it initiated. What we then are going to do is to find out if you are vibrationally aligned with the life that you want. So we're going to imagine it as a bouncer, and we're going to imagine that you've got to get past the bouncer, which means, it's all very well as logically saying it must have X, Y, and Z on this timeline. But if you're not vibrating with those things, then you're not going to attract it. So that's what we're going to be playing with on Thursday. So if that sounds interesting to you, then send me a DM and we can talk to see if it's suitable. Otherwise, I hope you guys all spend some time writing new timeline stories for yourself. So think of a timeline like a book, and then think of the different chapters and decide, based on the book you've written so far, do you want to write the next chapter, or do you want to close that book down and jump onto a complete new timeline to have a new story where the central character has a different not a personality, because we know personality and soul are different, but it is a different personality because it's more soul aligned. And imagine what that timeline with that more soul aligned being is walking, and the contracts that they've made to allow that to happen in their own interest. So thank you all. I'll say goodbye to YouTube because I'm going to join those on Zoom now and chat with them a bit more. So bye, guys.